I've told you before about being a woman in ministry and the strange looks that I sometimes get, and so I'm not going to belabor that, but I was thinking about the only time I've ever seen a triple take, and that's when I was about 29 and wearing my collar and 9 months pregnant. If you want to see someone actually look back at you 3 times to make sure they're seeing what they're really seeing, that's what you can do. But there's a pastor who looks a lot like me, and so I imagine she gets some double takes. But this is a pastor who probably gets a triple take, pregnant or not. She's a pastor in Denver, and her name is Nadia Boltz-Weber, and she's getting some press in the ELCA for doing some really, really innovative and amazing things in worship. She's doing some things with our traditional worship service that are really creative and really wonderful. And she did this thing the year that there was the Haiti earthquake, where she had people bring pictures from the earthquake of survivors and of loss and things like that. And they made a collage, and then when they were done with it, it looked like the face of Jesus. And that was part of their Maundy Thursday worship. Part of that. For Easter Vigil, the night before Easter, she talks about how they had a dance party, complete with a disco ball and a chocolate fountain. Because they said Easter should be a party. And so why shouldn't we have a party? And so in a very traditional form, she's doing these really wonderful things in worship. And so the ELCA is saying, we like that. We like what you're doing. So I was talking to her about, her to my mom, and I was describing her, and my mom said, I don't know if I've heard of her. And I said, well, she's the one with the tattoos. My mom said, oh, her. You might have heard of her as well, now that I say the pastor with the tattoos, because before you see all the amazing things that she does in worship, all this amazing creative liturgy, and she's been an activist for that all people should be included in clergy and in our churches, she's done all that, but what people notice about her is her tattoos. When she was ordained, she got some money. And what she did with it is she went and had the entire liturgical year tattooed from wrist all the way to wrist. So it starts out with the creation on this arm, and it goes through to Christmas. And it has, the baby Jesus in the manger, and it has a donkey and all those things. And then it goes into Epiphany with a bright light, and then she has Lent, and then on into Easter, and then Pentecost, the time of the church, is here on this wrist, the Holy Spirit. I think it's kind of cool. She has Lutheran liturgical tattoos. Yes, they go from wrist to wrist. And I'm sure she gets her share of triple takes because, like I said, she looks like me, she wears a collar, and she's tattooed from here to here with the liturgical year. She has a story where she couldn't figure out what she was going to do for a sermon about Lazarus being raised from the dead. That great story of where Jesus calls Lazarus forth before his own resurrection, and Lazarus, 4 days in the tomb, comes out, still with the grave clothes on. And so what she did, she went and got it tattooed on her leg. And so she said the sermon came really well after that. Watch out, I might try that if I get stuck. Now she has this beautiful tattoo of Lazarus coming out with these blue grave clothes sort of dripping off of him. It's not something that everyone would do. Last night, when I was talking about this, someone actually put his head in his hands as if to say, what is the world coming to? But they're the first thing you see when you see this pastor. And even though they're liturgically wonderful and liturgically appropriate, we have this strong reaction to tattoos. Even my own mom, who I was talking about these amazing things that this pastor had done, she said, oh, those tattoos. It's hard to get past them. And it's hard to see, why would someone do that? Where someone would intentionally want to have them look at them, have this triple take, put this on their body permanently. Why would you do this? to have these permanent scars. And I'm not talking about the little tattoos that statistics say most of us have. I'm talking about from arm to arm. I'm talking about a full sleeve of liturgical tattoos. You'd mark that on your body to show people as a witness, maybe, the story of God. We all have these different reasons. When you talk to people about their tattoos, you might hear different stories. You might hear stories that someone just was partying one night and decided to get a tattoo, but the majority of people I've talked to have a much better reason. They have a reason for remembering somebody that they've lost. They have a reason for wanting to bear witness to something that happened internally that was so meaningful or so terrible that they want to show it outwardly. It's like showing a scar that you have on the inside. Now you get to show it on the outside. Or loving something so much, a child or a spouse or the story of God, that you want it on your body forever. You want it on you permanently. Some people have a great reason for having this. Other people might say, that's ridiculous. I have scars that I didn't mean to get. And the older we get, the more scars we accumulate. I'm learning that every year. And there's a story for each scar that we have. For each scar, for each tattoo, for each mark that we have, there's a story behind it. There's a choice, or maybe there's an accident or a surgery. But they're part of who we are, these scars. When Jesus was raised from the dead, he came back with his scars. Did you hear that? He came back. In the Bible story, he comes back, and he still has his scars on his hands and on his side. He has his scars, and I think that's significant because one of the things that I think about when I think about the Last Day and all of us being raised, I think about the fact that I want to come back without my scars. I want to leave all that behind. But Jesus comes back with his scars. I read an old sermon this week, and when I say old, I'm talking 1800s. Charles Spurgeon was a great preacher in the 1800s, and the first thing I noticed was that I thought, sometimes if one of us, I'm not saying which pastor, but if one of us goes past 20 minutes, or maybe 25 minutes, I'm not saying which pastor, when one of us goes on a little further because we have more to say, I thought that's nothing compared to Charles Spurgeon. Y'all would have been here all day. This is a long, long sermon, and it was extensive, and it was about Jesus' scars. And in the 1800s, Charles Spurgeon was wondering the same things that I was wondering today, which was, why did Jesus come back with these marks? Why did he still have them? Couldn't God have scrubbed that out? When God raised Jesus from the dead, couldn't God have made that go away and made Jesus be clean, this resurrected body? Couldn't God have made him be whole? But instead, Charles Spurgeon wondered, and I did too, why did he come back with his scars? One reason that Charles, who I thought it was funny to think of him not even having any conception on the internet, and that someone 2 centuries later would be thinking about him, he said, and this applies to us today, that a wounded God can heal us. That when we look on a God who still has scars, it's healing to us. Because all of us have scars. They might be internal, they might be external, they might be something that we chose to put on ourselves to mark something, to mark an event, or to mark a tragedy. We all have those scars, and when we look at Jesus, we see someone who has scars too. We see someone who has wounds just like us. And Charles Spurgeon says, to look on a God with wounds is to be healed. In Isaiah 53, which we read during Holy Week, it says, by Jesus' stripes, it says, by his stripes we are healed. And we believe that this is talking about Jesus, the Messiah. By his wounds, we are healed. We don't know how it happens, but we know that because we are scarred people, that we are people who carry this with us. When we look on a Jesus that looks like us, that came back with his scars, that it's healing to us. When we come to Jesus when we're praying, when we come to Jesus and say, Jesus, I don't understand. Jesus, I'm hurting. Jesus, I don't understand the world today. Jesus, I'm feeling terrible. We are saying this to Jesus who has his wounds. We are saying this to Jesus who still has his scars. And that, I think, is healing to us. It is a healing thing to know that God is wounded too, whether the scars are internal or external or whatever they might be. It's healing to know that when we look at God, we see a God who also has our wounds. The scars, Charles Spurgeon says, are also Jesus' identity. They're how Thomas and the disciples knew Jesus was who he said he was. When they look at him, they're not sure who he is, this stranger who comes into the locked room and says, "Peace be with you." They don't know who he is until they see his scars. They don't know who he is until they touch the wounds in his hand and in his side. And Thomas, God bless him, is the same way. He's greedy enough to want to touch the wounds, to want to see them, because that's how he knows that Jesus is Jesus. Our scars, our tattoos, our internal and external things that all of us have, those are our identity as well. Sometimes they can become more our identity than we want them to. Scars from surgeries and from accidents and from all of those things that we wish hadn't happened, they can become part of who we are, those scars. But that was the way it was for Jesus as well. He didn't pretend that the cross hadn't happened because he still had his scars to show for it. And I think it's that way with us as well. Our scars are part of who we are. They tell our story. They tell what's happened to us. And so they also tell the witness that God has done amazing things through the things that have hurt us sometimes, and that we are being raised, that we are experiencing resurrection still through the scars that we have. That's the story that Jesus tells. That's the story that Jesus' scars tell. They bear witness to his resurrection, that it didn't just happen, that something terrible happened to him, and it affected him, and when he was raised, they were still there. But to look on Jesus' wounds can heal us. To look on the fact that Jesus has literally been to hell and back and is raised from the dead and has his wounds still can tell us that our scars come with us, and they tell our story of what God has done in our life, how God has healed us, how God has brought resurrection, how God will bring new life out of death, out of our scars. When we look on the wounded Jesus, we see resurrection. We're witnesses to that. When we see his hands and his sides, we are witnesses to what God can do. We're witnesses to the resurrection through his wounds. And it tells us that we're not alone. Amen.